Okay. So hello and welcome to the 2024 Open Texas Conference. And let me just, I've got a slide to share with y'all here. Hang on just a second. I'm having a little bit of difficulty. There we go. Okay, so welcome to the 2024 Open Texas Conference. The Open Texas Conference is sponsored and convened by two cooperating organizations, the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, the state agency that serves as a resource, partner, and advocate for Texas higher education in Texas, and the Texas Digital Library, a library consortium providing services that enable free and open access to scholarly, cultural heritage, and educational materials. My name is Sherry Ransdell, and I'm the Director of Instructional Design Services at San Jacinto College, and I will serve as your moderator today. We welcome you to introduce yourself and ask any questions in the chat. Please feel free to turn on your webcam, but mute your mic unless you're speaking. Also, please be aware that we are recording the session today. Recorded sessions will be available within the conference attendee hub for 30 days. Following the 30 days, the recordings will be accessible through the Open Texas YouTube repository. I will place a link to the conference code of conduct and the YouTube repository in the chat for your information. So today's session is the round 2 of lightning talks. And to begin our session is Mr. Eric Kowalik. He is an instructional designer at Marquette University. So Eric, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. All right. Can everybody see the slides or?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right. So yeah, hi, and thanks for taking the time to attend this session. I'm Eric Kowalik, an instructional designer at Marquette University, and I'll be discussing how the Marquette Library created a series of open educational resources for information literacy instruction. Before we get started, I wanted to share the link to the GitHub site for this project where you can learn more about it and download the modules that will be shown today. The files are free to download, though you will need to have a copy of Articulate Storyline if you want to edit them. The current versions were made with Storyline 360, but older versions can be found in the GitHub repository. Little overview of what to expect today. So I'll give a brief background about the program that these modules are used in, describe the development and implementation of the modules, explain the process we went through to kind of decide how to share the modules, and then explore lessons learned and some next steps. So Marquette is a Catholic Jesuit university. It was founded in 1881. If you're not familiar with the Jesuit order, they strive to be number one in all things, including humility. The campus is in beautiful downtown Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and had a 2024 enrollment of 10,908 students, 7,233 of whom were undergraduates. The instruction efforts I'll talk about today take place as part of Marquette's Foundation in Rhetoric program. It's a collaboration between the Marquette University English Department and the libraries, and it goes back to at least 1980. The nature of the collaboration has varied, but until recent years entailed mostly a traditional one-shot instruction and scavenger hunts, and FIR is taken by almost all incoming freshmen. There are usually around 46 sections of FIR, and it's by far the biggest instruction client for the library. It is also an opportunity for the library to connect with students and show them the value of the library and its resources. The course provides students their first exposure to academic research and academic writing, and is taught mostly by graduate students and adjuncts. In 2013, this collaboration began a new phase with the incorporation of online information literacy modules developed by the librarians. So traditionally, the signature pedagogy for the library research day for this program has been a one-shot instruction session where a librarian tries to fit all of the information literacy knowledge into either a 50 or 75-minute class session. The one-shot sessions present challenges. You can't always cover everything students need to know, and it can be especially difficult if a librarian has an early session in the unit before students have a research topic. Also, there's not a lot of librarian interaction before or after sessions. While students may learn in a one-shot where to find help, getting them to come for additional help after such a short exposure to libraries and their librarians can be a challenge. Often librarians end up being a lot like the actors in Christopher Guest's film Waiting for Guffman, which they anxiously await the arrival of Broadway producer Mort Guffman, who never arrives. In 2012, due to turnover in both the English department and the library, librarians and instructors took this opportunity to reconsider the library instruction format and implement some new strategies to improve teaching and learning of information literacy concepts in the FIR program. Some of the changes included the creation of a librarian role in the learning management system. This allowed librarians the same ability as an instructor, but without the ability to assign or view grades. So librarians could post content, create discussion forums, and review students' submitted work and leave feedback. Previously, librarians could select sections, so there were times when an instructor would have a different librarian for each of their sections. By assigning librarians to instructors and not sections, librarians could build relationships with their instructors, which allowed, in most cases, more integration of the librarian into the course. We encourage librarians to seek an embedded librarian model when working with instructors. And finally, we work to develop e-learning modules that could be incorporated into the learning management system for use in instruction. In developing the online modules, a team of librarians focused on threshold concepts, which Meyer and Land describe as core concepts that once understood transform perception of a given subject. So for example, the ability to narrow a research topic to find appropriate sources for your topic and the ability to correctly cite your sources are some of the threshold concepts for information literacy. The team also reviewed the literature on multimedia learning theory and development and relied heavily on Richard Meyer's work. Initially, the team had planned to develop a kitchen sink module that covered all these topics, but after reviewing the literature, the team decided on developing smaller focused lessons that offered practice opportunities, explanatory feedback, and gave students some control over the experience. The development team utilized paper prototyping when developing drafts of the modules. It's a variation of usability testing where representative users perform realistic tasks by interacting with the paper version of the interface that is manipulated by a person playing computer. And you can learn more about that from Carolyn Schneider's book, Paper Prototyping, the Fast and Easy Way to Design and Refine User Interfaces. So here's a photo from her book that provides an example of paper prototyping in action. It shows a paper version of a phone with various screens, also made with paper. As user clicks buttons on the phone, the person playing the computer swaps out the screens to simulate the device responses. By utilizing this approach, you can identify usability issues before developing a working prototype, saving you time and frustration. You're also more likely to embrace the suggested change instead of argue against it if you only spend an hour or so on a paper prototype instead of a couple of days developing a working prototype in the software. So using an iterative design process and paper prototyping, the development team spent the late spring and early summer of 2013 developing and testing the original 8 tutorials using Articulate Storyline. After a pilot in fall of 2013, these 8 tutorials were offered to FIR instructors and librarians for use in fall of 2014 instruction. And although 8 tutorials were developed, instructors were only encouraged by their librarian to use the Introduction to Academic Research tutorial as part of their course. To help librarians and instructors to better understand how to load the tutorials into the learning management system and what information would be captured, the development team created a website which showed all of the tutorials, provided links to demo versions of the tutorials, as well as instructions on how to load the tutorials into the learning management system and access and assess the reports produced by the system after students completed the tutorials. We also worked with Marquette's business intelligence team to develop a dashboard that's restricted to designated library employees that contains a variety of filters to allow librarians to filter through the data, including by module type, term, subject, course name, and date. Student responses to the module interactions can also be viewed via the dashboard. And if you're interested in learning more about the dashboard, there's a link to a short presentation about that. So since the modules were launched, there's been 3 types of implementations that we've seen utilized by instructors and librarians. So we have the lone wolf one where the librarian isn't really involved. The instructor's kind of just doing it on their own. The instructor adds modules and implements them on their own, either online or face-to-face. There's still the traditional one-shot instruction session that's either online or face-to-face, and modules can be set up as flipped learning where students can do some of the activities before and the librarian can check on what students are doing before the class session, or they can be used during class as an interactive experience, or besties where after relationships are built between the instructor and the librarian, and they end up having multiple class visits. Modules are integrated throughout the course and not just in one particular time slot. And the librarian is asked to kind of provide feedback on student work to provide additional feedback. In 2014, we presented at a couple library conferences. There was a lot of positive feedback, which led to a collaboration between Grand Valley State University and Marquette to co-develop Anatomy of Citation tutorial for MLA. And that kind of spurred us to think about ways we can share this with the wider library community. So we assessed different platforms that we want to share the modules on, either a LibGuide or Marquette's institutional repository. We decided on using GitHub as a platform because it's designed for software sharing and has the built-in ability to store current and previous versions of the modules, allows for documenting changes in the module versions, and provides a way for the community to add their own updated modules. So what have we learned so far kind of over this decade journey? Consider the license you want to release your OER under. Creative Commons may not be the best choice if your OER is software. What platform will make it the easiest to distribute your OER and allow the community to contribute to the project as well? The development cycle never ends. Technology and software changes. Ensuring your OER stays current, you need to keep developing it. Since the modules were developed, they have undergone 2 major revisions, one to transition the modules from Flash to HTML5, and the most recent to improve the accessibility of the modules so they support current web accessibility standards. Documentation for those who will be utilizing the modules is vital. If you build it, they will come does not apply here. Doesn't matter how awesome the software is. If faculty and librarians can't easily use it and assess the student work, adoption will be a challenge. And kind of next steps that we're looking forward to continue working on is from instructor feedback. There's a strong desire for a rubric to assess the modules, especially the open-ended feedback. We're a small development team. We want to ensure the modules are accessible to all learners, including those with assistive technologies. So we continue to test and improve in this area. And we really hope that there's some people hopefully in this lightning talk audience that are willing to be development partners and looking to expand and build on kind of the initial work we put together. So thanks again for listening to the lightning talk. If anyone's interested in learning more, helping out to continue developing the modules, please reach out to me. Thanks.
Thank you. If you have any questions for Eric about his presentation, if you'll put those in the chat, we will take all the questions at the end at the end of our 3 sessions. So our next presenters are Mindy Tomlin, who's a scholarly communications librarian with Collin College, and Andrew Trantham, who's an electronic and continuing resources librarian at Collin College.
All right, thank you so much. As Sherry mentioned, my name is Mindy Tomlin. I'm a scholarly communications librarian at Collin College at our Plano campus. I'll be presenting the first half of this presentation, and then my colleague Andrew, who is an electronic and continuing resource librarian at our McKinney campus, will be finishing up the last half of our presentation. So today we're going to be talking about empowering educators monthly webinars for college faculty. A little overview. We're going to give you a bit of information about Collin. I'll walk through our OER journey at Collin College and what led us to creating our program, the OER Cafe. And then Andrew is going to cover some of the different topics that we discuss in the cafe, some steps looking forward, and our contact information. So a little bit about Collin College. We're a community college district located in North Texas. We're about 30-40 minutes north of Dallas. And as of this past year, we are serving approximately 58,000 credit and continuing education students each year. For the most part, that is going to be first and second year students, but we do have a couple of bachelor's degree programs as well as a lot of workforce programs. We have 11 campuses and centers throughout Collin County, and we also partner with 16 area ISDs for dual credit programming. So we're a fairly big institution, and a lot of that growth has been in the last couple of years. When I first started, we had 3 primary campuses and a couple of ISDs, and really since 2020, we have been growing quite a bit to keep up with county expansion. So Collins OER, let me go back to the right slide. There we go. Colin's OER journey is probably similar to a lot of your institutions. There were a lot of ad hoc efforts when the OER and the open movement was really getting started in the aughts. And really, a lot of our people came together towards 2016 to 2018. 2016 was when Colin established a subcommittee with our faculty council teaching and learning to really start examining OER exploration. And 2018 was when a lot of departments on campus were really brought together to form an exploratory committee. And that was when I was brought on board. And this is in large part due to one of our administrators, our one of our associate deans at the Plano campus. Her name's Regina Hughes. She's one of the heads of our OER steering committee, and she recognized very early on that the libraries played a critical role in the infrastructure of supporting an OER program. So after a little bit of time with the exploratory committee, we decided we were going to move forward with campus-wide OER efforts. And then, of course, COVID happened, which derailed our efforts a little bit, but it also highlighted the importance of these resources, especially with a lot of our students when we were realizing a lot of them were food or housing insecure. So once we got back to operations after the initial COVID crisis, we really started putting a lot of effort into campus-wide OER efforts. And a lot of that was supported by some gear grants from the Higher Education Coordinating Board, as well as an ongoing State Farm grant. Basically, these grants were designed to educate faculty and encourage them to adopt um, to encourage them to adopt OERs in their classroom. So we provided stipends for these efforts. And as part of our initial round of grants, one thing that the faculty were required to do was to actually meet with librarians, and the librarians would sit down, show them a bunch of different places where they could find OERs, and we would look for OERs that might work for their classes. And if we couldn't find any, then we would discuss how they could create their own OERs. And that definitely unearthed that there was room for improvement in terms of faculty education. Um, that kind of tied into one of our other initiatives with the OER steering committee, which was we partnered with OpenStax and joined their institutional partnership. So every month, members of the OER steering committee would sit down with a representative from OpenStax, and we would discuss ways that we could improve OER efforts on our campus. And with each of these meetings, we would get sent information on what's happening within the OER community, and that led to information about another institution that was doing something similar, another OER cafe. And that's where I got the idea. I was like, hey, we're getting this demand for more OER education for our faculty. Why don't we try to take advantage of this Zoom momentum and let's see if we can find ways to actually chat with our faculty and reach them in a sustainable way. So like I mentioned, we were inspired by resources shared during the monthly OpenStax partnership meetings, and specifically North Carolina State University's libraries Open Cafe. Now, we wanted to provide introductory information to our faculty because, again, we were realizing that a lot of our faculty were creating OERs and not realizing it, or they just weren't quite sure of what an OER was. So we wanted to really reach out to them and give them quality information. So because we have as many campuses as we do, and a lot of faculty that we needed to reach, we were like, okay, we got to do this in a way that works with the number of librarians that we have, which is not nearly enough to support all of these faculty. So we opted to do online bite-sized information sessions for wider distribution, and we held them through Zoom. We decided to go ahead and record these sessions so that faculty can view them. if they couldn't make it to a live session, then they could look at them later. And I've actually had several faculty reach out and say that they use those for continuing education whenever they're re-upping their contracts. So those recorded sessions live on our institutional repository, Digital Commons at Collin, so that faculty can view those at their leisure. And now I'm going to pass it over to Andrew.
Okay, so I'm just going to quickly breeze through some of the topics that we cover and some information in each session. So the 4 topics we generally cover each semester are introduction to OERs, finding OERs, evaluating OERs, and copyright, fair use, and open licensing. So we'll go into a little bit about what each session covers in our subsequent slides. So for introduction to OERs, we always want to start off with a definition of OER. We found there's been some confusion on faculty understanding exactly what an OER is. So we always emphasize that those are freely available, openly licensed materials, and it has to be both. They can't just be one or the other. Also, we talk about the many different types of OER that are available. So although we tend to focus on textbooks, it also includes things like homework assignments, test banks, syllabi, etc. We also talk about the 5 R's of OER. So that's going to be the right to retain, reuse, revise, remix, and redistribute the material. We also talk about the major benefits. So that's going to include the fact that those materials are available on day 1 for students. They don't have to wait till their financial aid comes through so they can buy a textbook or anything like that. Or if the textbook has run out of their particular item that they need, they don't have to wait on any of that stuff. And also the fact that student learning outcomes are not affected in a negative way by using OER. Outcomes tend to be about the same, whether students are using traditional textbooks or open educational resources. And then we also talk about different ways that faculty can use OERs. So that would include adopting a textbook, which is basically replacing their current all rights reserved, copyright protected textbook with an OER. They could adapt an OER textbook, meaning they could find an OER that they like, but it has some stuff they want to change in it. So they can make those changes with most OERs due to their Creative Commons licenses, although that would not apply to no derivatives Creative Commons licenses. But for any other item licensed through Creative Commons, they would come with adaptation rights. Or if they can't find any OER that they like that are already freely available, they could look into creating their own OER materials. So yeah, next slide, please. Okay. And then our second session we typically do is called Where to Find OERs. So we always go through a recap of the OER definitions, freely available, openly licensed, and the different types of OER. This session is a live demo that tends to focus on open textbooks, open images, audio, and video. So some resources we typically highlight are OpenStax, the Open Textbook Library, Pexels for images, and then FedFlix, which is a federal government film repository through the Internet Archive. And then we also point them to our Collin College OER LibGuide, which contains a ton of helpful information regarding where to find OER materials. So next slide, please. And then our third session is evaluating OERs. So there we talk about, again, the definition and variety of OER material types. We talk about the fact that OERs vary in quality and suitability for specific courses. So faculty always need to carefully and thoughtfully evaluate any OER that they're considering using before they actually implement that in one of their courses. And then some of the primary considerations we discuss are keeping in mind the accuracy and quality of the content, how relevant the content is to the course they're teaching, the production quality of the OER materials, accessibility for all learners, the interactivity and engagement elements that might come in an OER, also the cultural relevance and sensitivity, and the licensing and ease of adaptability to their course needs. So there's a lot to keep in mind when evaluating OER for faculty if they are trying to decide if they want to use one in their courses. So we go through all that in our third session. And then in our last session, we talk about copyright, fair use, and open licensing. So we go through a definition of copyright with the faculty, and we note that basically traditionally copyrighted materials always require permissions from the author or some kind of an exception like fair use if they want to use those works in their classes. And then we also talk about open licensing. So we emphasize that occurs when the copyright holder is granted a set of permissive usage rights, such as through a Creative Commons license. And we note the Creative Commons licenses allow the copyright holder to retain copyright, but they still require that the author of the work be attributed to the work. And then we also go through the fair use exception, and we note that copyright requires that you always consider all 4 of the factors of fair use every time you do a fair use analysis, and that fair use arguments are usually only needed for all rights reserved copyrighted works, because openly licensed works like OER are already going to come with additional permissions. So you might not even have to go through a fair use analysis just because you've already been granted the explicit rights to use those materials. Yeah, next slide, please. And then looking forward, so we're currently looking into addressing additional topics for faculty who already have a baseline knowledge of OERs. And we're trying to investigate ways to support publication efforts at the college for faculty who want to create their own OER materials. And then, as always, we always try to advocate to the students and also on the students' behalf when it comes to OER materials, because we know they're facing a lot of financial pressure. So we're just trying to advance the OER cause currently. So, yep. And then there's our contact information. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Our next presentation is out of Texas State University and the Texas State University libraries. So we have Isabel Antis, who's an open educational resource librarian from Texas State University, Tricia Boucher, who's an open pedagogy librarian from Texas State University, and Hina Punjabi, who's an instructional design specialist from the Texas State University libraries.
Thank you. Let's get that screen shared. You should all be able to see our screen. Welcome to Backlink, but make it open. And I'm Isabel, the OER librarian.
I'm Tricia Boucher, the open pedagogy librarian.
And I am Hina Punjabi, our instructional design specialist for university libraries.
And as a reminder, backlinking is when you take a link to something and place it somewhere else, you can find that original item. But let's dig in. So to frame our conversation for today, we wanted to talk about the larger issues of open storage and open materials. So when we're looking for those OERs and trying to educate faculty on where to find them, it can be a challenge because there's a lot of places storing a lot of things. And there's not one consistent location that you can go to find all of that information in one place. And beyond that, there's a lot of other state and university examples that have provided the basis for this project. Georgia is a really good example because it has a similar structure where there's an institutional backbone for a lot of items that are then linked out to other platforms that enhance discoverability. And with that, we wanted to make sure that we emphasize the difference between how OER is stored and how open pedagogy is stored.
So just to take a second to talk about that, when you think about OERs, that's the materials, the OER material is being stored. Open pedagogy is often, materials are often the student product of an open pedagogy assignment or a renewable assignment. And with rare exception, like the Open Education Network's new open pedagogy repository, mostly you're seeing student work out there. And open pedagogy assignments are actually what our faculty are looking for, is the assignments that lead to these really great work products. So.
Yes, and so that is the integration of the OER products that might start the conversation and be the end result, the student product. Tricia's middle section about the open pedagogy, the actual assignment itself and the components of the assignment, but all of those are hopefully linked together and backlinked to each other to create this infrastructure that is more sustainable for our larger community going forward.
Sorry, Isabel and I share an office, so I have to mute. She has to mute whenever we do this. So really the important thing about, we were trying to do this really sustainably, And that really requires stability. So creating a stable collection, we are doing that within our Texas State University Digital Repository, which is hosted by the Texas Digital Library. We're using DSpace, and that creates a stable, curated digital space. It provides a persistent URL. It has the ability to provide a DOI for anything that is stored. And we're hoping to soon have some ORCID integrations. Very exciting news for us.
With the stability, we need to create some workflows and really some infrastructure that's going to continue to promote the stability, not only of the objects, but being able to access them, add to them, manage their organization and all. One of the first things that we want to look at is how we're actually organizing the materials to make it presentable to the user. Our digital repository, our institutional repository, is used in DSpace. DSpace is really, really great for this. It uses communities and collections. Communities house collections and let us have multiple levels of file structure, essentially. And it allows us to add metadata tags, use control vocabularies, all of the organization things that librarians and archivists are pretty good at. The difficulty here is that to have a collection of objects that have good metadata, we have to have good metadata oversight and being able to create that metadata in a high quality includes a lot of time and effort on our part. So one of the things that we've had to figure out is how do we balance that extra labor that we're going to be putting into this with and that additional insight with what the user is going to be putting in. So if a faculty member is submitting their object, they're able to describe the object, how much do we need to have oversight, and make sure that they're using different controlled vocabulary, using the metadata and the tags correctly, and things like that. And finding that balance so that way we're not totally overexerting ourselves and using our capacity where it's most needed. The second aspect of this is organizing the workflows for ourselves. Like I said before, DSpace offers a lot of flexibility, which is really great. It's very sandbox-esque. This does make it challenging though, because the guidelines are pretty simple, meaning that any extra guidelines that we want to put in place, such as you review it, then I review it, you check this, I check that, any of that is just going to be communicated outside of the actual platform. There aren't a lot of guidelines that can be technology enabled. And so that just means a lot of work on our end. And that's what we are willing to do. We're a pretty tight-knit team here. And so with the three of us working together, we want to create a set of workflows that works for us and for anyone that might come in the future and be working on this project later. Again, balancing that oversight and capacity needs. And we also want to make sure that there's not a single point of failure. If Isabel's out for a week, we need to have someone as a backup to be able to handle her area of the repository and things like that. Having areas cross-trained, not having that one point of failure, but still identifying an expert in that area that we can point to. And it's a lot of balancing that goes back and forth here.
So with that is that conversation that we're trying to facilitate, that discoverability. So while the workflows are great and having all of our metadata and components is the backbone of that discoverability piece, we acknowledge that exploration and reference are two different things. Oftentimes, DSpace is more known for finding a specific material that you already know about than it is for exploring new materials, right? So it's acknowledging that there might be reduced discoverability without that more intensive cataloging work. And DSpace functions for us on Dublin Core while our catalog focuses on MARC. So those two different schemes make it a little bit of a challenge to integrate the systems usefully and robustly. But there's an opportunity for future growth, which is very exciting, partially because creating this space with this permanent URL allows us to support our faculty in new and exciting ways. On my end of things with OER, that looks like more explicitly connecting the content made at Texas State with the statewide initiatives like OERTX. And what that looks like for Tricia is a little bit different.
So for me, it's actually creating workflows for putting open pedagogy assignments and all the parts and pieces that go into a successful assignment depending on the platform that students are using to share their work. All of that going to one place, but then basically outsourcing discoverability to other sites. So someplace like the Open Pedagogy repository, we would have a stable collection and a local collection, but then we would backlink from this open repository to ours.
I'm talking with my mic off. You think in 2024 I would have figured that out, but that segues great into our next section, which is questions for everybody in the session.
Thank you. So again, we're open for any questions. If you have any questions, we'll take those in the chat. While we're waiting on those, I do want to remind everybody that once our session ends today, we do have discussion boards that you can access through CVent. And specifically one, keep on OER talking, Texas and beyond, to continue this conversation and more about OER. I don't see any questions in the chat. Okay, I don't see any questions in the chat, presenters. Oh, wait, hold on, did I see something come up? No. It is post-lunch nap time, you're right. Okay, well, I'm gonna close us out then, and it looks like someone may have started a question. Oh, someone's asking, how about government websites? Lisa McQuaid is asking, how about government websites?
In terms of discoverability, and like OERTX government websites, or like SEC Edgar filing government websites?
Lisa, we may need, she uses them for sources.
It's a fantastic question, because I think there's a lot of agencies that create OER for their very specific area. So like the national parks often have like museum guides and things like that that are available as OER that you can use for your class. But if you remix them and use them in a new way, it can be hard to create that established backlink. What I've seen people do in the past is cite them and also internet archive the page, which is not the best solution, but it is a solution. And then that new developed item is stored in where their institutional space with that information as part of those fields. I'm not sure what it would look like going forward, especially if like that education system at large for higher education decided to move towards one searchable open system, but created web pages. Ooh, this is a delightful challenge. I think this is kind of more Trisha's territory, right? Like open pedagogy related.
Well, I mean, we actually had the conversation amongst ourselves whether or not open pedagogy assignments literally were just another type of an OER. So you can imagine how many rabbit holes we went down. So if those are web pages for, and I'm looking over at Isabel here, web pages that are used as an OER for a class, then that isn't going to be an OER. If you're having students create those web pages and you want that, that would be, but I'm curious, as creating web pages and you're using these existing NIH and FDA web pages. I'm going to say, I don't know. I think this is interesting. Again, I'm still looking over at Isabel, which is rude. Oh, you pay, yes. Yes, I love that you're making web pages with them. Are you locally hosting your web pages?
I think she said that they're in D2L, maybe.
Okay. Oh, wait. Okay, my And I'm thinking D2L is that Brightspace? Am I getting that correct? Okay.
Yes.
So it's not open outside. You could actually, God, it seems as though you should be able to make copies of those and save them in a repository somewhere without having them be open. All you need to do is retain copyright to them, to your web pages. I'm not a copyright and licensing expert, so. But I don't
Okay.
know. Yeah, you could export, I guess you could export the Brightspace page as a
Mhm.
packet.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that helps or not, Lisa. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah. Thank you, Lisa, for that question. That gives us all something to think about. Copyright and OER, so much fun. Are there any other questions? Okay. If not, then I'm going to close this out. Again, if you want to continue the conversation, please join us on the discussion boards. And I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording for today.